Imagine you're driving down the highway at like 75 miles an hour.
Okay.
You're in the left lane, you're passing a semi-truck, and suddenly your steering wheel just locks up completely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the brakes entirely disengage, the radio volume blasts to maximum so it's drowning out your own voice, and the climate control cranks the heat up to 90 degrees.
That is horrifying.
Right. But the truly terrifying part isn't just the physical loss of control, it's the realization that the person doing this to you isn't even in the car.
Right. They're miles away.
Exactly. They're sitting on a laptop in a basement halfway across the world, drinking a coffee and just running a Python script.
Yeah. It's the ultimate nightmare scenario. And the crazy thing is, it's no longer just confined to Hollywood hacking movies. I mean, we spent the last 3 decades building a world where physical systems are entirely reliant on digital commands.
We really have. And that is exactly where we are starting today. Welcome to the deep dive. Usually, when we talk about a cyber attack, the damage is contained behind a pane of glass.
Yeah. A frozen database or, a leaked email thread.
Right, or numbers just moving from one bank account to another feels, I don't know, abstract to most people. But the devices sitting on your desk right now, the sensors in your car, the connected infusion pumps in your local hospital, they have completely erased the traditional network perimeter.
They absolutely have.
We aren't just protecting data anymore, we are protecting physical reality.
Yeah, the boundary between bits and atoms is essentially dissolved. I mean, we've networked our physical infrastructure because it brings undeniable, massive efficiencies.
Right, the convenience factor is huge.
Exactly. But the trade-off is that a software glitch or a misconfigured router or, a malicious script, it can immediately manifest as a physical hazard.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the really heavy mechanics of how this happens and how we actually stop it, I want to quickly thank our sponsor, CISOmarketplace.com. Navigating this exact paradigm shift where the physical and digital collide, it's like the defining challenge of our era for security leaders.
It really is. It requires entirely new architectures.
And CISOmarketplace.com is the go-to resource for finding the verified tools and partners to build resilience in this hyper-connected landscape. We'll talk a bit more about how their ecosystem fits into this later on. But for our mission today, we are charting the evolution of the cyber attack, the pivot from data theft to actual cyber physical disruption.
Yeah, it's a massive shift.
We're going to break down the actual mechanics of device lifecycle management, pull apart the engine of zero trust architecture to see how it really works, and look at the legal reckoning that is finally forcing manufacturers to take this seriously.
I think the best place to start understanding this shift isn't actually in the future, it's in the past. The turning point was Stuxnet.
Right, the 2010 attack, or 2012 depending on when the code was actually deployed versus discovered. The attack on the Iranian nuclear facility at Natanz.
Yeah.
But let's go beyond the Wikipedia summary here. How did that code actually bridge the gap from a digital file to a literal physical explosion?
It is a masterclass in cyber-physical manipulation. I mean, Stuxnet didn't just delete files. It specifically hunted for Siemens Step 7 software.
And that's a programming environment, right?
Exactly. It's the environment used to control industrial programmable logic controllers, or PLCs. So once it infected a machine running Step 7, it essentially intercepted the communication between the Windows machine and the PLC.
Oh, wow. So it's performing a man-in-the-middle attack, but on industrial equipment instead of a web browser?
Precisely. It targeted the frequency converter drives. These were the drives that control the speed of the nuclear centrifuges.
Okay.
So Stuxnet injected its own malicious code block into the PLC, commanding the centrifuges to spin up to catastrophic speeds. I mean, literally tearing themselves apart from the centrifugal force.
That is insane.
But here is the truly insidious part. While it was destroying the physical hardware, Stuxnet fed a pre-recorded loop of normal, healthy operational data back to the monitors in the control room.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The operators just stared at green lights on their screens while the facility was physically shaking itself to pieces around them.
It's the ultimate digital sleight of hand. The system is just outright lying to the operator. But I mean, look, Stuxnet was highly classified nation-state weapon. It was dropped via a USB drive into an air-gapped facility. Today, we aren't talking about air-gapped nuclear bunkers.
No, not at all.
We're talking about the average corporate network, the local grocery store, the regional hospital.
And that's exactly why the threat has magnified so much. The principles behind Stuxnet have been democratized, basically.
Yeah.
And we've willingly removed the air gaps. What we have today is the convergence of IT. The information technology systems that handle your emails and databases with OT.
Operational technology.
Right. The tech that handles physical valves, pumps, and assembly lines.
I was thinking about this architecture, and the old model was basically like a submarine.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, like you kept the navigation systems and the nuclear reactor controls completely sealed off behind watertight bulkheads from the crew's mess hall. If a pipe burst in the kitchen, the sub still functioned.
Right. It was segmented.
But to make the submarine, smarter and more efficient, we've essentially drilled holes through every single watertight bulkhead just to run Ethernet cables. We wanted the data from the engine room to instantly show up on an iPad in the captain's quarters.
Exactly.
And now one leak in the kitchen sinks the entire sub. So the castle moat is essentially gone because we invited the Trojan horse in and gave it a Wi-Fi password.
That is a phenomenal analogy, honestly,
Yeah.
because it highlights the vulnerability of the conduit itself. The business value of drilling those holes is undeniable. You get predictive maintenance, automated logistics, real-time analytics, but the attack surface expands exponentially. And because of that convergence, the motive of the attacker has completely shifted. I mean, why bother silently stealing credit card numbers for pennies on the dollar on the dark web when you can halt a multi-billion-dollar physical operation and demand a massive ransom?
Which brings us to the 2023 attack on United Natural Foods. This isn't theoretical anymore. This is literal empty grocery store shelves.
Exactly. United Natural Foods is a massive logistics distributor. The attackers breached the IT network, but because of that convergence we talked about, the IT disruption immediately cascaded into the OT environment.
Wow.
Yeah. It blinded the systems managing warehouse inventory, automated forklifts, cold chain logistics. You can have thousands of pallets of food sitting in a warehouse, but if the routing algorithm that tells the physical trucks which bay to back into goes down,
That food might as well not exist.
right, it paralyzed a critical link in the supply chain, resulting in immediate, visible physical shortages.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. If the risk is a complete paralysis of your physical supply chain, why do it? Why not just weld the bulkheads back shut? Like, why not completely decouple the IT and OT networks and return to the air gap days? Is the convenience of IoT really worth this level of exposure?
Well, it's not about convenience. It's about survival in a hyper-competitive global market. If a manufacturer isolates their OT network today, they lose real-time telemetry.
Right.
They can't run AI models to predict when a robotic arm on the assembly line is going to fail. They have to do routine, manual maintenance, which requires physical downtime. Meanwhile, their competitor, who has a converged, hyper-efficient network, will operate with 20% less downtime and just outprice them completely.
So it's an economic imperative.
Exactly. The economic reality is that isolation is no longer a viable business strategy. The only way forward is to secure the convergence.
Which is exactly why the market is scrambling right now and why having a curated ecosystem like CISOmarketplace.com is so vital. If you're a security director who suddenly finds themselves responsible for a fleet of autonomous warehouse robots, you can't just slap a traditional IT firewall onto an industrial control system and call it a day.
No, the protocols are entirely different.
Exactly. But let's look at where this gets truly dangerous. It's one thing to miss a shipment of avocados. It's another when digital breaches intersect with human safety. Let's dig into the healthcare sector.
Yeah, healthcare is really the bleeding edge of this crisis. It currently exhibits the highest per-incident financial impact of any sector. The modern hospital is built entirely on the Internet of Medical Things, or IOMT.
I was reviewing the fallout from the February 2024 ransomware attack on Change Healthcare by the ALPHV Group, or Black Cat. The numbers are almost hard to comprehend. We're looking at an estimated $2.46 billion in costs.
It's staggering.
Yeah, impacting roughly 190 million individuals. And the physical manifestation of that IT breach was weeks of nationwide pharmacy disruptions. People literally could not get life-saving prescriptions filled because the digital routing for insurance claims was just completely severed.
And that's just the logistical side of healthcare. Look at Ascension Health with their $1.8 billion loss.
Yeah.
Or the Synovus attack in the UK.
Right, the pathology services provider.
Exactly. When their systems were locked by ransomware, it didn't just stop billing, it stopped blood matching. Over 3,300 operations and appointments were canceled, and tragically, that specific disruption was linked to a patient death.
Wow.
Yeah, when you sever the data flow in a modern hospital, you are severing the physical care pipeline.
Walk me through the architecture of a hospital that makes it so brittle. Because you walk into a hospital and you see all this incredibly expensive, highly advanced machinery, MRI machines, robotic surgery suites. It feels incredibly secure. How does a phishing email to a billing clerk end up locking an MRI machine?
What's fascinating here is that it happens because the hospital's operational stack comprises three interlocking layers that are rarely segmented properly. First, you have clinical IT.
Okay.
That's the electronic health records, the billing department, the scheduling software. This is usually where the phishing email lands. It's just standard IT.
Right. The typical Windows environments we're all used to.
Exactly. Then you have the second layer, which is the IOMT, the infusion pumps, the portable ultrasounds, the patient monitors. These are highly specialized devices. They have very limited processing power, which means you often can't run modern antivirus software on them.
Oh, because they just physically can't handle the compute load.
Right. And worse, they are capital expenses designed to run for 15 to 20 years. You have vital medical equipment actively treating patients today that is running on Windows CE or embedded Linux kernels from 2008.
You're kidding?
No, and they haven't received a security patch in a decade.
That is horrifying. And the third layer.
The third layer is facility OT, the building management systems. The HVAC systems controlling the negative pressure in infectious disease wards. The medical gas distribution. The sterilization autoclaves.
Wait, so if a threat actor compromises the facility OT, they could theoretically alter the airflow in an operating room, like compromising the sterile environment and making the room physically unusable?
Absolutely. And the core failure here is that these three layers are often resting on a flat or at least very loosely segmented network. A staggering 53% of connected medical devices have known unpatched critical vulnerabilities.
53%. Over half.
Yet, only 15% of healthcare organizations actually have a dedicated strategy for this. The attacker doesn't usually start at the medical device. They start in the clinical IT layer, establishing a foothold through stolen credentials. Once inside, because there are no internal watertight bulkheads, they simply pivot laterally into the IOMT network and deploy the ransomware directly to the life-critical machines.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to drill down into a very specific vulnerability I saw in the analysis regarding Baxter Sigma Spectrum wireless infusion pumps, because this perfectly illustrates the total collapse of physical and digital security. We tend to think of hackers sitting behind keyboards in dark rooms, but this attack vector is entirely physical.
Yeah, this one is wild.
Walk us through how a threat actor steals secure hospital credentials using literally just a piece of plastic they bought online.
It's a brilliantly simple, devastating hardware exploit. These specific Baxter infusion pumps use a detachable battery module that also houses the Wi-Fi card.
Okay.
This allows the pump to connect to the hospital's secure wireless network to download dosage libraries and, update patient records.
So far, so good. It needs to be connected to be useful.
Right. But the vulnerability lies in how the pump's main processor handles the WPA2 network credentials. An attacker can go on eBay, purchase a compatible used battery unit for a few dollars, and just walk into a hospital.
Just walk right in.
Yeah. They find a pump sitting in a hallway, which happens all the time in hospitals, detach the legitimate battery, and physically plug in their eBay battery.
Just a hot swap in the middle of a corridor. No one would even look twice if someone in scrubs did that.
Exactly. When they power cycle the pump, the main unit attempts to reestablish its network connection. In doing so, it transfers the hospital's secure, unencrypted Wi-Fi credentials directly across the physical connector pins into the non-volatile memory of the newly attached battery module.
It just hands over the keys to the kingdom. Unencrypted.
Unencrypted, right into the flash memory of the battery. The attacker then simply pops the battery off, puts it in their pocket, and walks out the front door.
Wow.
They now possess the decryption keys to the hospital's internal wireless network. No advanced coding required, no zero-day exploits, just an understanding of how the hardware bus communicates with the memory module.
That is wild. They don't even need to be on the network to hack the network. They just use the physical device as an ATM for network credentials. But look, this IT-OT convergence isn't just a healthcare issue. I was looking at the retail logistics models, and the complexity of cold chain logistics is mind-bending.
Oh, retail is a massive target.
Yeah.
We aren't just talking about stealing credit cards from point-of-sale systems anymore. A modern grocery chain relies on millions of IoT sensors to maintain the cold chain. Think about a shipment of vaccines or highly perishable food. There are cellular connected temperature sensors in the truck, in the warehouse, on the smart shelves, and in the display case.
And if an attacker breaches the IoT management platform, they don't even need to shut the refrigerators off, right? They just alter the reporting telemetry.
Exactly. 72% of retailers were hit via IoT devices recently. The attackers alter the sensor data to report that the freezer's at a safe 34 degrees Fahrenheit while they simultaneously disable the physical compressor. The management dashboard shows green lights, but the physical product is slowly spoiling.
Just like Stuxnet.
It's exactly like Stuxnet. By the time the physical spoilage is discovered days later, millions of dollars of inventory are destroyed, and the attacker demands a ransom to restore the system.
We saw massive breaches at Giant Tiger, losing 2.8 million records, and JD Sports losing 10 million. And these were facilitated through IoT vulnerabilities. But let's scale this up even further. Let's talk about large venues, like stadiums. A modern stadium is essentially a hyper-complex, temporary smart city.
Stadiums are a convergence nightmare. You have 80,000 people packing into a confined space. The venue is running high-density Wi-Fi 6 networks, digital ticketing, augmented reality fan apps, point of sale for hundreds of vendors, all running alongside the industrial controls for stadium lighting, massive HVAC systems, and physical security gates.
Let's run a simulation of an attack here. What does a coordinated strike on a smart stadium actually look like?
An attacker would likely use a multi-vector approach to maximize chaos. First, they launch a massive distributed denial of service, a DDoS attack against the cloud-based digital ticketing API just as the gates open. The scanners go down. You instantly have tens of thousands of people bottlenecking outside the stadium, creating a massive crowd control issue.
Right, and people get angry, the pressure builds at the physical turnstiles. It's a huge safety risk.
Exactly. And while the venue's IT security team is scrambling to reroute traffic and mitigate the DDoS on the ticketing API, the attacker uses that distraction to pivot into the facility OT network. They trigger the stadium's emergency protocols, commanding the physical access gates to lock down or drop, and they override the stadium lighting, plunging the concourses into total darkness.
You've just weaponized the building against the occupants. You've created a localized panic, a physical safety hazard, entirely through a cyber incident.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, how are they actually getting in? Are we dealing with highly advanced, custom-coded zero-day exploits for every single attack?
Occasionally, yes, if it's state-sponsored actions. But overwhelmingly, the answer is no. They are using extremely old, well-understood tricks. The interconnectedness of our systems just amplifies those old tricks to a catastrophic level.
Let's talk about the exact mechanism of credential-based attacks. We mentioned the eBay battery, but usually it's far less sophisticated. It's automated credential stuffing. I was looking at the 2024 Roku breach, where 576,000 accounts were compromised. How exactly does an attacker stuff 500,000 credentials?
Credential stuffing relies entirely on the fact that humans are terrible at password hygiene. When a massive database is breached, say, a fitness app or an old email provider, the attackers dump millions of usernames and passwords onto the dark web.
Okay.
A new attacker downloads that list. They write an automated script, often utilizing a massive network of residential proxies.
What does that mean, residential proxies?
Basically, routing their traffic through thousands of infected home computers to mask their true IP address and bypass rate-limiting defenses.
So Roku servers don't see one IP address trying to log in a million times. They see a million different IP addresses trying to log in once.
Exactly. The script simply takes the email and password from the old fitness app breach and tries it on Roku, on bank websites, on airline portals. And because users reuse their passwords across multiple services, a statistically significant percentage of those logins will succeed.
It's just a sheer numbers game. And the fundamental failure in basic security hygiene extends all the way to corporate environments. The analysis highlighted the 2025 McDonald's incident. Security researchers breached an AI chatbot system that was protecting the personal information of 64 million job applicants. Do you know what the administrative password protecting that massive database was?
I do, and it's painful.
123456. That is just absurd.
It sounds absurd, but it is shockingly common. And when you scale that level of negligence to the deployment of IoT devices, it creates an infrastructure-level crisis. Millions of security cameras, smart thermostats, and industrial sensors are shipped with default, hard-coded credentials, literally admin and password. Users plug them in, they connect to the internet, and they never change the password.
Which leads directly to the botnet problem. We all remember Mirai back in 2016. It hijacked 100,000 cheap webcams and DVRs and essentially broke the internet on the East Coast for a day. But the analysis points out that this wasn't a one-off. It's evolved. We have the Matrix variant of Mirai and recently the Raptor Train botnet.
Yeah, Raptor Train is a perfect example of how this threat has matured. It compromised over 200,000 small office and home office SOCIO routers and IP cameras.
Wait, 200,000 routers? Like the one sitting in my living room right now.
Exactly like that one.
Let's break down the anatomy of a botnet like Raptor Train. How does an attacker actually control 200,000 disparate devices across the globe?
It starts with scanning. The attacker servers constantly scan the entire IPv4 address space, looking for devices exposing specific ports. They're often exploiting universal plug-and-play protocols, or TR-069, which ISPs use for remote management. Once they find a vulnerable router, they inject a small payload that forces the router to download the main malware binary.
So the router's now infected. Who is giving it orders?
The malware forces the router to phone home to a command and control server, a C2 server. The C2 server acts as the central brain. Those 200,000 infected routers essentially form a massive dormant zombie army.
Wow.
They sit quietly, functioning normally for the homeowner, so you have absolutely no idea your router is compromised. But when the attacker wants to launch a DDoS attack, they send a single command from the C2 server, and instantly 200,000 routers simultaneously flood the target's IP address with garbage traffic, overwhelming it completely.
It is terrifying that your own hardware in your house could be silently participating in an attack on a municipal water facility without you knowing. But this brings up a crucial concept from the analysis: systemic risk in a homogeneous world.
Yes, the blast radius effect. In the past, networks were highly heterogeneous. Different hardware, different operating systems. Today, we have a monoculture. If millions of IoT devices are running the exact same proprietary firmware, a single vulnerability isn't just a local problem. It's an industrial-scale catastrophe.
The Moody file transfer breach is the textbook example of this blast radius. Movie is a specialized software used by thousands of enterprises specifically to securely move massive files. The CLOP ransomware gang found one single SQL injection vulnerability in the MoveIt code. How did that translate into such a massive breach?
A SQL injection basically tricks the database into executing malicious commands by inserting them into standard input fields. CLOP uses vulnerability to bypass authentication and install a custom web shell directly onto the MoveIt servers of thousands of organizations simultaneously.
They don't have to hack 2,600 different companies. They hacked one piece of software that 2,600 companies used.
Exactly, supply chain risk. They systematically exfiltrated the databases before the companies even knew they were vulnerable. The blast radius resulted in the compromise of data from 77 million individuals globally. One single point of failure.
Which means we can't just react to these threats anymore. We have to engineer them out of existence. We need to fundamentally change how devices exist on a network. This brings us to the foundational defense strategy outlined in the research: Device Lifecycle Management, or DLM.
DLM is the recognition that an IoT device is an active participant on your network, and you need absolute cryptographic certainty of its identity and integrity from the moment it is manufactured until the day it is destroyed.
The analysis breaks DLM into 3 stages. I want to spend some real time on stage 1, secure onboarding, because this is where the default password problem dies. How do we give a device a cryptographically verifiable identity?
We rely on public key infrastructure, or PKI. During the manufacturing process or during initial provisioning, the device is injected with a unique private key and an X.509 digital certificate signed by a trusted certificate authority, or CA.
Okay, let's unpack that process. Let's say I'm an industrial HVAC controller. I get plugged into the corporate network for the first time. What exactly is happening in those first milliseconds?
The device initiates a handshake with the network authentication server using a protocol like mutual TLS-MTLS. The device presents its digital certificate, essentially saying, "Here is my ID, signed by a certificate authority you trust."
Okay.
The server checks the cryptographic signature to verify it hasn't been tampered with. Then the server sends a random string of data, a challenge, to the device. The device uses its hidden private key to encrypt that challenge and sends it back.
Because only the device with the true private key could encrypt it in a way that the server can decrypt using the device's public key.
Exactly. It proves possession of the private key without ever transmitting it across the network. If the math checks out, the network authenticates the device. There are no passwords to guess, no credentials to stuff. The identity is cryptographically bound to the hardware.
And at that exact moment of onboarding, we apply the principle of least privilege. The network says, okay, I know you are the HVAC controller, therefore, I am only going to open a network pathway between you and the building management server. It has no physical route to talk to the payroll database.
Precisely. That is microsegmentation, which leads into stage 2. Resilient operations. You've securely onboarded it, but now you have to maintain it for a decade. This involves continuous monitoring and automated patching.
Which sounds great on paper, but let me push back here for a second. The data shows that 80% of attacks exploit known flaws. Organizations know the patches exist, but they don't apply them. And honestly, I understand why. If you have 10,000 remote sensors running a factory floor, pushing an automated firmware update is terrifying. If that patch has a bug and it bricks the devices, you've just shut down your own factory.
You are highlighting the exact operational friction that causes security failures. Administrators are terrified of breaking availability. But the alternative is certain compromise. This is why modern DLM requires digital twins and staged rollouts.
How does that work?
You push the patch to a virtual replica of your network first. If the digital twin doesn't crash, you roll the patch out to 1% of the physical devices. You monitor for anomalies, then 10%, then 100%. You have to build automated confidence into the patching pipeline.
That makes total sense. And finally, we have stage 3, safety commissioning. This is exactly where the hospital failed with the Baxter infusion pumps. When that pump, or its battery, reaches the end of its life, you can't just toss it in an e-waste bin.
You must perform secure data wiping and, crucially, certificate revocation.
How does the network know a certificate is revoked?
The network uses certificate revocation lists, or CRLs, or the Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP. When you decommission a device, the administrator formally tells the certificate authority to invalidate that specific X.509 certificate.
Okay.
From that millisecond on, if an attacker rips the memory out of that device and tries to use the certificate to log into the network, the authentication server checks the OCSP, sees the certificate is on the revoked list, and just denies the connection.
I think of DLM like the life of a physical passport. When you apply for a passport, you go through rigorous background checks, you provide birth certificates, that's stage 1 secure onboarding. The government issues you a cryptographically secure booklet. During its valid life, customs officers scan it at every border to verify it hasn't been flagged or tampered with. That's stage 2 operations. And when it expires, the government punches holes through it, and the database marks it invalid. If someone digs it out of your trash and tries to board a flight, the scanner flags it immediately. That's stage 3, decommissioning.
It's an exact parallel. Security must be baked in, not bolted on. It has to be an inherent property of the device's life cycle, from birth to death. This raises an important question, though. How do organizations possibly manage thousands of these devices manually? They can't, which leads to the necessity of automated provisioning. But even if you know exactly who a device is, how do you control what it is allowed to do second by second inside the network?
And that is the perfect pivot to the most misunderstood concept in modern cybersecurity, Zero Trust Architecture, or ZTA. The philosophy is never trust, always verify. It is the total death of the flat network. We assume the attacker is already inside the building.
Exactly. The old model was a medieval castle.
Yeah.
You build a massive firewall, a moat, you inspect everyone at the drawbridge. But once you let someone inside the castle courtyard, you assume they are friendly. They can wander into the armory, the kitchen, the throne room.
Right.
Zero Trust says there is no moat. Every single room inside the castle has a biometric lock on the door, and you have to prove who you are and why you need to be there every single time you turn a doorknob.
The research breaks this down into 3 logical components, and I really want to visualize how this works in real time. We have the policy information point, or PIP, the policy decision point, PDP, and the policy enforcement point, PEP. Let's run a simulation. I am a maintenance worker logging into my tablet to adjust the HVAC system in a secure server room. Walk me through the microsecond. My finger hits the submit button.
The moment you request access, your request hits the policy enforcement point, the PV. In modern networks, this is usually an API gateway. It is the bouncer at the door. The PEP puts your request on hold. It then queries the policy information point, the PIP.
So the PIP is gathering context.
Exactly. The PIP acts as a massive telemetry aggregator. It looks at your user identity. It looks at the tablet you are holding. Is it a corporate-issued device? Is the operating system fully patched?
What else?
It looks at your location via IP or GPS. Are you actually in the building? Or is this request coming from an IP address in Eastern Europe? It looks at behavioral biometrics. Are you logging in at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday or 3 a.m. on a Sunday?
So it builds a massive multi-dimensional risk profile in milliseconds.
Yes. All of that context is then forwarded to the brain, the policy decision point, or PDP. The PDP runs that specific context against the organization's dynamic risk engine. It evaluates the rules. This is John on a verified tablet during normal hours, fully patched. The PDP calculates a low-risk score. It sends an authorization token, often a JSON web token containing specific claims, back to the API gateway.
And the gateway, the PPP reads that token and opens the door, but it doesn't open the whole network.
Crucially, no. It creates a microsegmented ephemeral pathway that allows your tablet to communicate only with the specific API endpoint controlling that specific HVAC unit. The moment you close the app, that pathway ceases to exist.
This is why ZTA fundamentally breaks ransomware. Ransomware relies entirely on lateral movement. If a threat actor breaches the maintenance tablet and they try to execute a script to scan the network for the billing database, the API gateway simply drops the packets. There is no route. The attacker is trapped in a micro segment of one.
It changes the architecture from default allow to default deny.
But hold on, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the end user here. If I have to be verified every single time I open a file or click a link or a device sends a ping, doesn't the network just grind to an absolute halt? If the API gateway has to run a multidimensional risk calculus for every single packet, the latency must be unbearable. It sounds like an administrative nightmare that will just make employees hate the IT department.
That is the most common critique. But it fundamentally misunderstands modern deployment. In a mature zero-trust architecture, the user experience is actually better than traditional VPNs, because all of this context gathering happens invisibly in the background.
How so?
Well, if you are operating within your normal baseline, your trusted laptop, your home Wi-Fi, your usual working hours, the PDP issues long-lived tokens that the PEP validates instantly via cryptography. The friction is zero.
So it's not a human typing a password every 30 seconds, it's machine-to-machine validation.
Exactly. It's identity-first security. It is only when the context shifts, say, you suddenly try to download 50 gigabytes of customer data from a coffee shop IP address you've never used before, that the dynamic risk score spikes. The PDP detects the anomaly and interrupts the session, prompting the user for multi-factor authentication or blocking the action entirely. The friction only appears when the risk dictates it.
That makes total sense. The friction scales dynamically with the risk. And I want to pause here to mention that ripping out a legacy flat network and implementing true dynamic zero-trust architecture across thousands of devices is a monumental undertaking. You don't just buy a software box labeled zero trust and plug it in. It's a complete architectural philosophy shift.
Definitely.
This is exactly where leveraging platforms like CISO marketplace.com becomes essential. Security leaders can use it to find the specific architectural consultants and API gateway vendors who actually understand how to map out this journey without breaking existing business operations.
Because doing it wrong absolutely will break your operations. And frankly, implementing zero trust in a climate-controlled corporate office with gigabit fiber and endless cloud compute is the easy part. The true test of zero trust is what happens at the tactical edge.
Which is some of the most fascinating research in this entire stack. We were talking about DDIL environments, disconnected, denied, intermittent, and limited bandwidth.
This is the extreme frontier of networking. Think of a military unit operating in a remote combat zone where adversaries are actively jamming satellite communications.
Or civilian first responders in the immediate aftermath of a hurricane, where the fiber backhauls are severed and the cell towers are physically destroyed.
Exactly. The problem immediately becomes obvious. Zero trust assumes continuous verification. It assumes the API gateway at the edge can instantly ping the cloud-based policy decision point to ask, hey, does John still have access?
Right.
If the satellite link drops, that query fails. Do you just get locked out of your own mission-critical systems while under fire? Does the medic lose access to patient blood type data because the cloud is unreachable?
That is the exact paradox. If you hard fail closed, you lose operational capability when you need it most. If you hard fail open, meaning you just cache the credentials indefinitely and let everyone have access when the network drops, you create a massive security vulnerability that an adversary will exploit the moment they jam your signal.
Right.
The solution the research points to is the Tactical Edge Triad architecture, or TETA. How does TETA solve the physics problem of a severed connection?
By pushing the entire architecture down to the edge, TITA distributes localized versions of the PIP, PDP, and PP directly into tactical gateways, like a ruggedized server in the back of a Humvee, or even onto the edge platforms themselves, like a drone or a medic's tablet. It allows for localized survivability. The edge node becomes its own sovereign zero-trust environment.
Okay, but let's say the Humvee loses connection to Central Command for 3 days. How long can Central Command trust the local decisions being made by that isolated Humvee? What if the Humvee was captured?
This introduces a brilliant mathematical concept called authority decay. In a traditional network, trust is binary. You are either authenticated or you aren't. In a DDIL environment, trust is a function of time. When a tactical platform loses its connection to the authoritative cloud server, its local permission space doesn't remain static. It progressively degrades over time.
We're talking about, right, the active permission set decays based on an algorithmic curve.
Precisely. Let's say a commander is using an edge terminal. While connected to the cloud, they have access to top-secret strategic intelligence. The connection is severed. For the first 60 minutes, the local PDP continues to grant access to those top-secret files, assuming the immediate tactical situation hasn't changed.
Okay.
But at hour 2, the authority decay algorithm kicks in. The local PDP automatically revokes access to the strategic intelligence, downgrading the commander's access to only localized tactical maps. By hour 24, if the connection hasn't been reestablished to refresh the cryptographic tokens, the system locks down entirely, allowing only basic survival communications.
It's an operationalization of continuous verification designed specifically for the realities of physics and warfare. It limits the blast radius if the device falls into enemy hands. But if the device is disconnected, how do you verify the hardware itself hasn't been tampered with? How do you know an adversary didn't just pry open the ruggedized server and extract the encryption keys from the hard drive?
This relies heavily on hardware roots of trust, specifically Trusted Platform Modules, TPMs, and a fascinating piece of engineering called Physical Unclonable Functions, or PUFs.
Okay, when I read the documentation on PUFs, my mind was genuinely blown. This sounds like science fiction. Explain to me how a microscopic flaw makes a chip unhackable.
It leverages the absolute limits of silicon manufacturing. When you fabricate a silicon wafer, no two microchips are exactly alike at the atomic level. Even on the exact same assembly line, there are microscopic inherent variations in the doping concentrations and the oxide thickness.
Uncontrollable manufacturing defects.
Exactly. Normally, engineers try to minimize these defects. A PUF weaponizes them for security. Specifically, it uses the startup state of static random access memory, or SRAM cells.
Right.
When you power on a SRAM cell before you write any data to it, it has to physically settle into a state of either a 1 or a 0. Because of those microscopic variations, a specific cell will reliably settle into a 1, while an adjacent cell settles into a 0.
So if you read the raw startup state of thousands of these cells across the chip, you get a completely random, incredibly complex string of ones and errors.
You get a unique, unclonable cryptographic fingerprint. And here is the genius of it. The key is never actually stored in the non-volatile memory. It doesn't exist on a hard drive to be stolen. The cryptographic key is generated dynamically by the physical properties of the chip itself only when it is powered on and queried. The moment you power it down, the key vanishes.
So what does this all mean? That is incredible. You can't steal the key because the key is the physical geometry of the chip itself. If an adversary tries to physically crack open the chip with an ion beam to read it, they destroy the microscopic variations, altering the fingerprint and destroying the key in the process. It's tamper-proof by the laws of physics.
It is the ultimate evolution of hardware security. But as you can imagine, implementing localized zero-trust architectures and designing custom silicon with PUFs is astronomically expensive and incredibly complex.
Which brings us to a harsh reality check. We have all this amazing theoretical technology, but we have to pay for it. I want to highlight a breaking news piece in our analysis stack. The Department of War recently suspended its CMMC 2.0 Phase 2 requirements.
CMMC being the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It was a massive, sweeping framework designed to force every single contractor in the defense industrial base, from Lockheed Martin down to the machine shop making 3 screws for a jet engine, to prove they meet strict, audited cybersecurity baselines.
So why on earth would the government suspend a mandate designed to secure the military supply chain? That seems completely counterintuitive given everything we've just discussed about supply chain risk.
Because the economics of compliance became a greater threat than the cyber adversaries. The Small Business Administration and industry groups provided data showing that the bureaucratic burden, the cost of third-party audits, and the capital expenditure to implement these strict controls were bankrupting smaller manufacturers.
Innovative startups and specialized machine shops were literally exiting the defense market because they couldn't afford the compliance paperwork.
Exactly. The department realized a fundamental truth. Perfect security is useless if it destroys your industrial base. Losing access to leading-edge commercial capabilities and consolidating the entire supply chain into three massive prime contractors who can afford the compliance was a strategic disaster. It's a massive pivot that illustrates the constant tension between maximizing security posture and maintaining operational capability.
It's the ultimate tightrope walk. You can't mandate a level of security that bankrupts the ecosystem. But while governments recalibrate their regulations, the adversaries aren't waiting. Technology keeps moving forward.
I want to shift our focus to the future. What are the tools that are going to define the next decade of defense? The analysis focuses heavily on three transformative intersecting technologies: artificial intelligence, digital twins, and post-quantum cryptography. Let's start with AI. We are projecting an ecosystem of over 27 billion connected IoT devices in the next few years. The volume of telemetry data, the logs, the network flows, the authentication requests is beyond human comprehension.
Right. Manual threat hunting is dead.
We have to move from reactive security to predictive threat intelligence.
I was looking at the specific deep learning models the research highlights. It's not just basic machine learning. They specifically point to long short-term memory networks, or LSTMs. How does an LSTM fundamentally change how we detect a threat compared to a standard firewall?
Well, a standard rule-based firewall is essentially a bouncer with a list. It looks at a packet of data, and if the IP address is on the bad list, it drops it. It has no memory of what happened 5 minutes ago.
Right.
An LSTM, however, is a type of recurrent neural network specifically designed to understand temporal sequences. It possesses a memory cell and a forget gate.
So it understands the context of time.
Exactly. It analyzes the flow of network traffic over days and weeks. It learns the exact subtle rhythms of your specific factory floor or hospital network. Because it understands the sequence of events, it can detect an anomaly that a rule-based firewall misses entirely.
Like what?
Well, if an attacker uses legitimate credentials to slowly exfiltrate data, sending tiny, seemingly benign packets over 48 hours, the firewall sees nothing wrong. The LSTM sees the temporal pattern deviation and flags it with over 95% accuracy. It's not just reacting to known malware, it's recognizing the behavioral signature of an attack before the payload is even delivered.
Okay, so AI gives us the predictive detection. But once the AI flags a massive, complex attack on a cyber-physical system, how do we safely respond? We talked earlier about the fear of bricking a network with a bad patch.
That is where the second technology comes in: digital twins. A digital twin is a high-fidelity, complete virtual replica of a physical asset. It's not just a 3D model. It is continuously fed with real-time telemetry from the physical sensors, mirroring the exact state of the physical system in the digital realm.
The research used the SoFi Stadium deployment as a prime example. They mapped the entire multi-billion-dollar venue, the HVAC, the high-density Wi-Fi, the turnstiles. Every physical system has a digital counterpart.
And from a cybersecurity operations perspective, a digital twin is the ultimate game changer. It provides a risk-free, mathematically accurate digital laboratory. Let's say the AI detects a new, aggressive ransomware variant propagating through the stadium's IT layer.
You can't just randomly start shutting down servers in the middle of a playoff game to try and stop it.
Precisely. Instead, the security team injects the malware signature into the digital twin. They simulate the attack at millions of times normal speed. They map out exactly how it will attempt to traverse the API gateways to reach the physical lighting controls.
Wow.
Then they use the twin to test mitigation strategies. They can simulate a microsegmentation quarantine rule in the twin, verify that it stops the ransomware without accidentally shutting off the stadium lights, and only then deploy that validated rule to the physical network.
It's the ultimate sandbox. AI detects the threat, the digital twin validates the response. But those two technologies rely heavily on data integrity and secure communication. Which brings us to the elephant in the room, the existential threat that could unravel all of this, the collapse of modern encryption.
Yeah, we have to talk about post-quantum cryptography, or PQC, because the clock is ticking.
Let's lay the groundwork for this. Right now, the entire internet, every banking transaction, every secure military communication, the PKI certificates we discussed for device lifecycle management is secured by algorithms like RSA or elliptic curve cryptography, ECC.
And those algorithms rely on mathematical problems that are incredibly difficult for classical computers to solve. For RSA, it's prime factorization. Factoring a massive number into its two prime components would take a traditional supercomputer millions of years.
But a quantum computer doesn't think like a classical computer.
No. A sufficiently powerful, fault-tolerant quantum computer running Shor's algorithm can solve that prime factorization problem in hours or even minutes. The moment that machine comes online, often referred to as Q-Day, the cryptographic foundation of the digital world instantly evaporates.
And people might think, well, Q-Day is 10 years away, we don't need to worry about it today. But the research highlights the most terrifying reality of this entire deep dive. The harvest now, decrypt later attack vector. I really want you to absorb this concept. Adversaries, well-funded nation-states are currently intercepting and storing massive volumes of encrypted data.
Yes.
They are vacuuming up encrypted health records, intellectual property, secure communications between autonomous vehicles. They can't read a single line of it today. But they are hoarding it in massive data centers.
They are simply waiting. They are building a time capsule of our most sensitive data. The day they switch on a capable quantum computer, they will retroactively break the encryption and read everything they've harvested for the last decade.
Yeah.
Your secure, encrypted data from today is essentially already compromised in the future.
It's a retroactive breach, which is why the transition to post-quantum cryptography isn't a future problem. It is an immediate emergency.
This is exactly why the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has been aggressively finalizing new PQC standards. The algorithms they've standardized, like FIPS 203, 204, and 205, abandon prime factorization entirely. Instead, they rely on complex mathematical structures like lattice-based cryptography.
How does lattice math stop a quantum computer?
Think of a multi-dimensional grid, a lattice with hundreds of dimensions. The mathematical problem involves finding the shortest vector, the shortest path, between 2 points in this incredibly complex shifting grid. This is known as the learning with errors problem. The math is structured in such a way that it completely confounds Shor's algorithm. It is mathematically resilient to both classical supercomputers and future quantum computers.
So, if we look at the entire architectural vision the research lays out, wait, AI provides the continuous predictive detection. The digital twin provides the safe environment to simulate and validate the response strategy. And post-quantum cryptography protects the underlying data communications flowing between the physical edge devices, the AI, and the cloud, ensuring the integrity of the whole system against future quantum adversaries.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is an incredibly robust, closed-loop defense cycle. It is the gold standard for navigating the cyber-physical era.
But let's be realistic. Implementing DLM, zero trust, AI anomaly detection, and entirely new cryptographic standards across a global enterprise is incredibly expensive. Corporations are fundamentally driven by profit. They aren't going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to re-architect their entire production lines just out of the goodness of their hearts. Technology alone can't fix this if companies aren't forced to use it. Which brings us to our final section, the regulatory reckoning. The global legal landscape is finally shifting the economic incentives.
For the last 30 years, the technology industry has operated on a foundational principle of buyer beware. If you bought a cheap, poorly coded smart camera from a generic manufacturer, plugged it into your home Wi-Fi, and it was subsequently infected and used in a botnet, well, that was considered your problem.
Right.
The liability almost entirely rested on the end user or the organization that deployed the device. The manufacturer took their profit and walked away.
They successfully outsourced the systemic risk to the consumer.
Exactly.
Oh.
But lawmakers globally have realized that in a cyber-physical world where that compromised camera can be used to DDoS a hospital's power grid, buyer beware is no longer an acceptable public policy. The liability is fundamentally shifting.
We're seeing this play out differently across the globe. In the U.S., the approach has historically been market-driven. The IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020 was a major step, but it essentially tied federal procurement directly to NIST standards. The government said, if you want to sell 1 million smart thermostats to federal buildings, they must meet this baseline.
Yeah.
It uses the massive purchasing power of the U.S. government to pull the market upward. And for consumers, we are seeing the rollout of the FCC Cyber Trust Mark, which is a voluntary labeling program, kind of like an Energy Star sticker, so consumers can visually see if a product meets baseline security standards before they buy it.
The U.S. approach relies on incentives. The European Union, however, is taking a vastly more aggressive mandatory approach.
Yeah.
They have recognized that the market will not correct itself fast enough. They've rolled out sweeping frameworks like NIS2 for critical infrastructure and DORA for the financial sector. But the most significant piece of legislation we need to discuss is the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA.
The CRA is monumental. It essentially rewrites the rules for participating in the European economy. It establishes mandatory, non-negotiable cybersecurity requirements for virtually all products with digital elements sold within the EU market.
It mandates security by design as a legal requirement, not a marketing buzzword. Manufacturers must perform and document deep cyber risk assessments before a product goes to market. They are legally mandated to report actively exploited vulnerabilities to authorities within 24 hours. And crucially, it mandates that manufacturers must provide free, automated security updates for a minimum of 5 years from the product's release. You can no longer abandon a product the day after you sell it.
And the teeth on this legislation are incredibly sharp. The penalties for non-compliance with the CRA aren't just a slap on the wrist. We are looking at fines of up to 10 million euros or 4% of a company's worldwide annual turnover, whichever is higher. They will literally pull non-compliant products off the shelves across the entire European Union.
Which means security is no longer an optional value-add feature that a project manager can cut at the last minute to save 20 cents on manufacturing costs. It is a strict legal prerequisite for market access.
And I enthusiastically agree with this shift. It is long overdue. If a company manufactures a connected infusion pump, or a smart thermostat, or a refrigerated truck sensor, and through sheer negligence in their code, they allow that device to be weaponized to take down critical infrastructure, they need to be held legally and financially accountable. The era of absolving manufacturers of the blast radius they create is over.
It forces the entire industry to adopt the device lifecycle management and zero trust readiness we've been discussing, not out of goodwill, but out of absolute financial survival. If you want to sell globally, your architecture must be secure.
It is a massive structural transformation of how we interact with technology. Okay, let's take a breath. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by exploring how the network perimeter has completely dissolved, transforming digital threats into real-world physical dangers, from Stuxnet tearing apart centrifuges to ransomware paralyzing hospital infrastructure and cold chain logistics. We walked through the critical mechanics of device lifecycle management, explaining how public key infrastructure gives every device a cryptographically secure identity. We tore down the flat network and simulated how an API gateway enforces true zero-trust architecture using dynamic context. We pushed all the way out to the tactical edge to understand authority decay and the mind-bending physics of unclonable silicon chips. We looked at the predictive power of AI and the existential threat of quantum computing, and finally, traced how aggressive global regulations like the CRA are forcing manufacturers to actually take responsibility for the hyper-connected world they've built.
It is a lot to synthesize. But as we consider this new paradigm and the advanced tools we are deploying to secure it, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We discussed the mathematical certainty of post-quantum cryptography and the absolute physical uniqueness of PUFs, those microscopic inherent flaws in silicon. As these technologies mature and converge, we're rapidly approaching a reality where a machine's digital fingerprint, generated by the atomic structure of its hardware, is far more reliable, verifiable, and mathematically secure than any form of human identification or biometric data. In the near future, when evaluating access to our most critical physical systems, will we trust the cryptographic authentication of machines more than we trust ourselves?
That is a profound question and slightly terrifying to contemplate. Thank you to my expert co-host for guiding us through this incredibly complex territory and making the mechanics of it so clear. And to you, the next time you sit in your connected car, or look at the smart thermostat on your wall, or walk past an infusion pump in a hospital corridor, I encourage you to look critically at them. They aren't just gadgets of convenience anymore. They are gateways to physical reality. Thank you one final time to our sponsor, CISOmarketplace.com, for making this deep dive possible. We opened this conversation talking about the medical sector and how we generally rely on the clean, binary precision of an X-ray. It's either broken or it's not. But as we've explored today, in the hyper-connected world of cyber-physical systems, that X-ray machine itself might be compromised, and we are navigating diagnostic muddy waters. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.